Hello everyone, this is Peak Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video, and this will be a review of Castlevania, the animated series. Now this was an original Netflix anime production based on a classic video game series of the same name, which was created by the Japanese company Konami. Now, I've recently caught up with all of the episodes of Castlevania, and I've managed to binge watch the series really over the past 2 to 3 days. So I thought it was more appropriate to do an overall series review rather than do individual seasons. There will probably be spoilers throughout this video, so just to warn you now, just in case you haven't caught up with all the episodes, you can of course go to Netflix and catch up with all the episodes and then come back to this review if you don't want to be spoiled about the overall story within this series. Now, Castlevania was created and written by Warren Ellis, and it debuted on Netflix back in July 2017, running for 4 seasons until May the 13th, 2021, consisting of 32 episodes, and of course it concluded with its 4th and final season this year. Now, Castlevania is very much of a stylish, adult-orientated gothic fantasy with multiple elements of dark atmosphere, sex, violence and mature themes. The story is set up within 14th century in a town called Wallachia, where we follow the tale of Vlad Tepes, or as we know more infamously, Count Dracula, who meets and marries a young woman, and years after their marriage, his wife is captured and burned at the stake after falsely being accused of witchcraft. Seeking vengeance, Dracula fails to overrun this town with an army of demons within the next year or so. We then catch up with the main protagonist of the series, Trevor Belmont, who is a monster hunter, and he joins forces with a speaking magician named Cypher, and they travel across the lands battling Dracula's forces. Now, overall, Castlevania for me, this is a series that is one of the most stunningly animated shows that I've recently seen. It's an extremely stylish, dark, intense gothic fantasy in terms of an anime. It's very similar to the likes of the classic Vampire Hunter D. If you don't know what that is, you can check out my review of that within my channel. We very much have the same brooding, mature tone from Game of Thrones, and it shares so many aspects of that show, both in the positive and the negative, and I will explain that throughout this review. The animation itself is obviously the best ingredient of the show. The visuals are of a truly exceptional standard. The distinct style, the way the characters are drawn, everything from the castle designs to the backgrounds to the landscapes, everything is so distinctive and vivid, as there are huge assortments of werewolves and monsters and demons and wildebeests, and it really is visually lush and a true feast for the eyes, and it's very pleasing to see such a high caliber and standard of anime production be maintained for the most part throughout all 4 seasons. This is also supported very much so by the dark serious tone that the show creates. There is truly an atmospheric mood, and there's a certain sophistication and maturity in its storytelling, which is very refreshing, as I feel what's lacking is so much of today's anime is that it's that storytelling. We get the visuals, we get the action, we get the atmosphere at times, but it's the lack of characterization and storytelling which I think is missing so much from today's anime, and Castlevania thankfully has that for the most part, though there are a few issues which I will go over throughout this review. There are also some issues that I had with the pacing and the storytelling. There are stages throughout where many story arcs are insignificant, and certain characters aren't quite as essential as what they should be. At certain points the story meanders and can become a bit ponderous, lacking a certain focus. Sometimes the episodes and the way they flow can be a bit disjointed. There are certain aspects that come out of nowhere, it seems. They don't quite get the build up and development that certain other elements do overall. I found a bit frustrating also the way the episodes ended. They wouldn't really end on a typical conclusive style. This is very much more of a serialized arc where you're not really watching individual episodes as such. You're really watching much more of a giant movie, particularly when we talk about the first season as well. So when we have a look at the characters overall, the 2 primary protagonists are Trevor Belmont and Sephia, of course, and they both start off very well, but I think they do become sidelined at times throughout various seasons, and they don't quite feel as important to the story as what they should do. This goes even more so for Alucard, who it really should be the primary character, I feel, that really drives the story. But in particularly season 3 as well, there are certain elements where I felt that he could have been completely taken out of the show and it wouldn't have made a bit of difference, and I think that's a failure of not making him more integral to the story overall. We go to other characters such as Hector, who start off really interesting and very well, but they end up becoming very weak and disappointing throughout the show as it progresses. Other characters such as Camilla and Isaac have potential to be truly great villains of the show, but the show doesn't quite maximize on their true motivations and their set goals and follow them through properly, and again, this is another weakness overall within the show. So when we look at the individual seasons of Castlevania, we start off with season 1, which was very confusingly short at only 4 episodes. I still don't know or can get to grips with the decision behind that. Maybe it was initially started off as a whole movie, as I mentioned before, and maybe they made the late decision to split it up into 4 individual episodes. But I don't understand why any show would begin with only 4 episodes, but it really does start off an exhilarating pace. So the premiere episode is truly amazing as we really are transported in its immersive world, and the Dracula really comes across as a very compelling character, full of rage and tragedy. It's really what we've seen a lot within previous adaptations. Season 1 is very action-packed and spectacular as we follow Trevor talking down monsters and taking them down. This was, I think, Trevor Belmont at his best. He's very funny, he's very loose. We see him in the second episode, he's very drunk, he's very much of a anti-hero, I think, to begin with. Overall, he's lacking a bit of drive and purpose, and that purpose is given to him when he of course encounters Sophia's family, and then he gets to know Sophia, of course, and then they go on their various adventures. But I really like the characterization with Trevor Belmont, particularly in the first season overall, and really this season hit a high point, I suppose, with its conclusion where we see both Trevor and Sophia discovering Alucard as Dracula's son. That was a very interesting and very engrossing reveal, and then we kind of concluded with the 3 heroes wanting to band together in order to take down Dracula and his forces. So despite season 1 being very short, it still ended on a very high note and was very action-packed and spectacular and exciting overall. Now we go on to season 2, and this was expanded with 8 episodes, and this season was even more compelling, not necessarily from an action point of view, from definitely much more from a character point of view. We concentrated primarily more on Dracula's castle and the people serving under him, and this is where we met both Hector and Isaac, who were very interesting in the beginning of this season. We learn that they support Dracula's cause because we see how they've both been wronged by human society, and they're both very complex personalities. Hector on the one hand wants to cull and control the human population and set them in a particular order, whereas we look at Isaac, who feels that his love and his affection for humans has been betrayed and abused, and he feels that humans can no longer be trusted. And I very much love the opening episodes where we see some very intense scenes learning about the backstories between the 2 characters, and this is when they were at their strongest. Also, we have Camilla, who comes from Styria, and she has her own ambitions to usurp Dracula from his throne and take over his castle, and we see her right throughout the season manipulating both Hector and Isaac in the process. We have Godbrand as well, who's very reckless and a vile character, very much lusting for blood, and he frustrates a lot Dracula because he's always questioning his motives and what the overall plan was. And this is where, for me, the show really shined. We get so many compelling themes of vengeance, betrayal, and status, and secrets, and motivations, and this is all very good. And this is really when the show typified a lot of what we saw, particularly from Game of Thrones. Now, while it wasn't as action-packed, it was very engrossing. I was very immersed in these characters, and it proved to be a very compelling show at this point. Now, the downside to this was the protagonists, in terms of Trevor, Sophia, and Alucard, really became sidelined. They really spend the majority of their time in the library, learning to conjure up spells, and they only really come into real significance in the last 2 episodes, where we see them infiltrate Dracula's castle, and then we conclude with Alucard finally killing his father, resolving to the fact that it's a lonely place accompanying the castle on his own, and that's where we see him breaking down. We also saw Isaac being left in a desert, and that was a way of Dracula protecting him from the ongoing assault within his castle. And he goes on to set his own army of monsters, because we all know both Hector and Isaac of Forge Masters, and then we see Hector being taken under Camilla's rule because she wants him to forge an army of demons so she can begin to overtake the land in Dracula's absence. So on the one hand, I think it was a very strong ending for Isaac, but a very weak ending for Hector, because he's completely tricked and manipulated at this point, and it was perhaps a bit of a weak point that they never truly suspect what Camilla's up to, and they don't have any contingency plans just in case she does indeed betray them. And I think that was something that was a bit of a weak aspect about Dracula as well. So I think overall season 2 was much more improved in terms of the story and the characterization. I think the show suffered in the fact that it did kill Dracula. I think it would have been far better to keep Dracula ongoing throughout the entire 4 seasons overall, but still at this point the show was very much hitting a high mark. But then we go to, I think, the end point of season 2, when it kind of felt that Trevor and Sophie's arc was completed. We see them at the ending scenes here, where they decide that they want to go on more thrill-seeking adventures. They don't know where their future truly lies, and you really could have ended their story at this point. And this led to season 3, and this is, I think, where we start to see some of the bigger issues and flaws within the show, particularly with the storytelling and the pacing. I think this season suffered very much from a lack of focus and a substantial plot overall. There was no real character growth between any of the characters that we saw. There was no real ongoing arc that took them on a further direction. If we look at Trevor and Sophia's, they tried to make them a lot more humorous, and yes, there is a bit of banter and camaraderie between the two. That's, I think, the show of trying to input some lightness amidst all of the darkness, so moments of that are welcome, but there were times I just didn't really understand what was their purpose and their motivations behind this. And again, much like season 2, there are many times within this season they do become sidelined and they're not as much of the interesting characters within the show. If we look at the path of Isaac, he has some very good monologue scenes and he has conversations with multiple characters, and I think they were trying to really set him on the path of redemption. We know that from season 2 he's seeking revenge and he wants to really just watch the world burn and destroy all the humans. So that's why I think they were building his character overall. So for the most part, I can understand the intent, but we don't really get necessarily a payoff. I think he reaches the redemptive point, I think, midway through the season, where he's talking for the likes for the pirates and the captain, and we already see a softening and the tone of his character. So when we get to the ending of this season, it's no real payoff because we already reached the stage of this character earlier on. We look at Camilla, and as I mentioned before, she should have been the next big villain of the series after Dracula left, but for the most part she just spends most of the season talking about her schemes but not really doing much with it. She's really undercut by the presence and the emergence of her other sisters within her clan. We look at the likes of Lenore, Marana and Stigga, and Lenore really is the most prominent of these three. She looks to connect to Hector because they want to use Hector to build them an army of demons so they could look to take over the various cities. But again, this really lessened the character of Hector, who very much is weak and he's cucked really as a character, first through Camilla and then later on through Lenore as well. They tried to build this relationship between the two, but I don't think it really rang true. I think it's just more of a case that Lenore was very loneliness because she spent most of her time around her sisters and she just wants a male companion to be around. So I never truly believed in that. We had Alucard's story arc. Again, that really felt completely derivative, as he all too easily gets tricked and tortured by two twins whose own motivation itself is very weak, and this story I feel could have been completely taken out and would have made no difference overall. And we get so many other characters that really eat up time and don't feel as important to the story, and I felt really disappointed by season 3. It lacked any real impact. The only real significant part was a truly standout 8th episode where we get an amazing spectacle of an assault on Styria and his forces, and then we really get intercut between other battles, and then we get some truly vivid sex scenes, as I mentioned before, between Alucard and the twins, and also between Lenore and Hector, and that's where she finally gains control of him and manipulates him in order to forge the monsters for them. But apart from that, it really fell flat, and it really comes across at this stage where they didn't really know where to take the story in terms of the characters going forward. And As we ended the third season, we see Trevor and Sylvia riding off, establishing the fact that now their future is far less of a thrilling adventure and much more of an endless fight between monsters as well. So I just felt season 3 overall was very disappointing. The atmosphere and the animation was still there, but the storytelling and characterization was very disappointing at this point. We then go on to season 4, and this starts off with a much more improved beginning, much more action packed, as we see Trevor and Sophia go on following the 6 weeks post the events of season 3, when they're endlessly fighting monsters and really trying to decide what their true purpose is. We see Isaac finally moving forward now with his armies to invade Styria and coming to the ultimate confrontation with Camilla in what is truly a spectacular fight sequence. I believe it's the 5th or 6th episode, where we see Camilla truly literally going out with a bang as she realised all of her ambitions and plans really unraveling at this point. Now, whilst the battle sequences were spectacular, there was some shakiness in terms of the framework within the animation. It did look at times that the animators took some shortcuts. I mean, this show overall is a very high value production, but sometimes when it came to the battle sequences, it did seem that they were really diluted sometimes with some over hyper edited shots, and sometimes it was a bit incoherent to muster what exactly was going on. But still, this is a very intense and hugely significant battle sequences. We see later on that Isaac finally frees Hector from his bondage, and the two come to the realization that hate and vengeance isn't really the true way overall. It's about living a more peaceful life, a better life, and looking to set a better world. I think this concluding arc of this season really redeemed both characters, especially Hector, who I felt was really weak overall, but I did like the fact that he managed to trap Lenore overall and come to an understanding with Isaac. They really went to great efforts to make sure that Isaac wasn't just killing people just randomly for no reason. I did like that line overall when he says that seeking vengeance is for children, and how we need to grow up and get a bigger perspective on life. So that really concluded both the arcs of Hector and Isaac, and I think overall, when I look at this section of Castlevania, this really should have been the season 3 finale, because we really get the culmination of what happens to Isaac, Hector, Camilla, Lenore, and sisters as well. So at this point, their story is concluded. Now, the action after this arc was definitely intensified, as we see one final story arc concerning plans to revive Dracula from hell, and this is propelled by Saint Germain. He wasn't my favourite character overall. We see him introduced in season 3, and we get large scale assaults on both Alucard's castle and his group of villagers that he's established and taken in, and also on Trevor and Sylvia as well. And we get some truly epic fights and set pieces, some great visuals, and the musical score is truly outstanding at times. Now, in the climatic battle, again, sometimes the animation, it does lose itself. When we come to the final duel between Trevor and the deaf character, which was really, I felt, out of left field. It just seemed to come out of nowhere, just much like a lot of this final story arc, where we get armies just seemingly not really built up, just coming out of nowhere and fighting en masse. And again, the way that the story twists and turns, and we get certain antagonists really introduced at the last minute, it wasn't truly convincing, as was the battle between Trevor and Death. This was balls out spectacular, and at times it was truly thrilling and exciting, but at other times it felt really rushed in terms of the way it was staged. Again, the hyper editing and the quick cuts of the animation techniques was a bit over the top, and I think it was a bit too frenetic and chaotic. It resembled very much the last 25 to 30 minutes of Dragon Ball Super, the Broly movie. If you go and watch that movie again, the action was just too frenetic, so you couldn't really make out what was going on. And that was what I felt also with this episode here, is that this climatic duel, they strained so much to make it an epic fight, but again, it just lost its way at times. And I also question the fact that how powerful was Belmont, you know, because this deaf character was meant to be like the ultimate demon, and Belmont at the end of the day is just a human character, yet he's able to fight this deaf demon, pirouetting and throwing his chain and jumping over all of these cliff tops and everything. I think it was a bit over the top in making Belmont too OP, and I think it would have been far better suited if Alucard had fighting this demon beast at the end. But overall, it was still a spectacular conclusion. despite the over the tops and the kind of random elements they were seeming pulling out at last minute. But in terms of the overall conclusion of the season, I think it was very well rounded. We did get a happy ending in terms of Cynthia and Trevor, and everything was rounded off very nicely. And I always praise the show that for all the twists and turns that it takes throughout its season or multiple seasons, that it comes to a conclusive ending. It doesn't leave anything open-ended. It doesn't leave anything that is dangling, because that could be very frustrating as a viewer if you're invested in the show. So I think it was good that they managed to come to a very sound resolution, which made complete sense. We got essentially a happy ending where we see Alucard now very at peace with his castle, looking to build a better world of the villagers under it. We see Trevor reuniting with Cynthia, and we know that Cynthia is pregnant now, so they're going to go on and be very happy. And then Cynthia concludes with the line, "I think we won." So that was a very nice rounded ending. And then we get a final scene. I was a bit confused because I thought that during the end battle, where we kind of get this really confusing element of Dracula and his wife being resuscitated in this hermaphrodite like body, it was very confusing at this point. They were just throwing things everywhere. But we get the final concluding scene where we see Dracula and his wife just quietly lying together in a home. They drop some lines about they want to visit England. Again, I don't know if this is the showrunners leaving something dangling as to maybe we get a future continuation. If it's not Castlevania by name, maybe it's another spin-off series. We'll wait and see in the long run. But again, I wasn't sure, did they get out of the temple corridor at the end? Were they released at the last minute? Did they pull some sort of trick to get out under people's detection? I wasn't sure. But yeah, at the end, it was just a very fitting end, because I suppose the show started with Dracula losing his wife and wanting to attack all the towns. So I suppose it was a nice cyclical ending that he ends the series with Dracula in bed together in harmony with his wife. So like I said, overall a very sound resolution for what I think was a very stunning and vivid animated series overall. Very pleasing that for the most part it managed to keep its story to a mature level and didn't lose it like we see with so many today's anime series. So if I had to give an overall score for the entire series of Castlevania, I would give it a 7.9 out of 10. Now hopefully we have seen in lately followed in the same suit, Blood of Zeus, which you can check out my reviews on my channel as well, and that has very similar elements with Castlevania in terms of the atmospheric, dark, brooding, mature style along with the violence as well. So hopefully Blood of Zeus can elevate itself to the same level as Castlevania for its second season, whilst at the same time not fall into the various pitfalls and traps in terms of the storytelling and pacing that I felt Castlevania fell through, certainly in its third season overall, which was the weakest show overall. But overall, very pleased with the fourth season and the conclusion overall of Castlevania. So let me know what you think in the comments below if you managed to see all of this series. Did you think it compared very well to other recent anime? Did you find it superior? How do you think it compared in terms of that Game of Thrones style? Do you think we should be seeing more in terms of Castlevania, in terms of this much more of this adult orientated, stylish, mature adaptation? I personally would love to see that, and I think it bodes very well for the future if we can get more Netflix productions with this high value and epic standard of animation and atmosphere as well. So that was all very good to see. So those are my overall thoughts and views on the entire series of Castlevania. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit those subscription and like and notification buttons so I can provide you with more reviews like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.